Group 3 Documentary and Entertainment presents The Harlem Renaissance.
So many things were happening in the time period between World War One and World War Two. This was a time for physical movement as many families migrated from the remote areas of the South to the industrious cities of the North in what was called the Great Migration. Many Black men fought in World War One and came back after the war with a fighting spirit. They wanted that equality that they had been denied for many years. They also wanted to keep that sense of freedom that they had experienced during the war in Europe. This massive demographic shift dramatically altered African American society, history, culture, and politics. During the 1920s, it produced a revolutionary period of Black artistic expression in literature, music, and thought known as the Harlem Renaissance.
To highlight the poetry of the time, we have highlighted two featured poets. Here's Ashley Day presenting Gwendolyn Bennett.
Gwendolyn Bennett was born in 1902 on July 18th in Giddings, Texas. She did most of her growing up in the Washington, D.C. area. She studied fine arts at Columbia, where she later transferred to Pratt University. She published her first poem, called Nocturne, in the November 1923 version of The Opportunity magazine. She published over 20 poems in the 1920s. The genre of her poems consists of the African American experience and the issues Black men and women face. I sailed in my dreams to the land of night where you were the dusk-eyed queen, and there in the pallor of moon-veiled light the loveliest things were seen. A slim-necked peacock sauntered there in a garden of lavender hues, and you were strange with your purple hair as you sat in your amethyst chair, with your feet in your case's shoes. Oh, the moon gave a bluish light through the trees in the land of dreams and night. I stood behind a bush of yellow-green and whistled a song to the dark-haired queen.
To highlight the poetry of the time, we have highlighted two featured poets. Here is Donnell Walker presenting Claude McKay.
Claude McKay, born Festus Claudius McKay, was born in Sunnyvale, Jamaica in 1889. He was a key figure of the Harlem Renaissance movement of the 1920s. Claude came from a big family. He was one of 11 children. He was also well educated at a young age, accepting an offer to attend Tuskegee Institute in Alabama in 1912. He immigrated to the United States. He is also an author of many books and many poems. One notable and most famous poem, If We Must Die, was first published in Max Eastman's communist magazine, Liberator. The poem, which was McKay's best-known work, is a response to the terrorism that black citizens throughout the country experienced at the hand of their white neighbors in 1919.
If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men, we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying but fighting back.
While the era existed, poetry was one of the most powerful tools of African American artists and still is to this day despite the end of the era. For many historians, the end of the Harlem Renaissance began at the same time Wall Street began to crash. The result of Wall Street crashing resulted in the downfall of the United States economy, which ultimately led into the Great Depression. Since patronage is one of the biggest factors responsible for enabling some of the great artists of the time to focus on their work, this untimely economic hardship helped to derail the Renaissance movement. The period itself floundered over the next decade and loosely ended around 1937 and was completely over by the start of World War II in 1939. Although the Harlem Renaissance was over, the cultural and societal effects it had have lasted long past the era's time. No one can forget how expansive of an era this time was for the greatness of African American creativity and art, specifically in poetry, but also in fiction, drama, music, painting, and sculpture in works that dynamically had a vastness that was truly amazing considering African Americans were just over a half century removed from slavery. The artists of this time encapsulate the evolution of the African American people's psyche, as well as their place in society, not just in America, but in the world. They began a new version of the conversation that had been started by many before them and still exists today. A conversation of what's possible for us, where are we going, and are the answers to those questions of our choosing. In that sense, I think the residue of the Harlem Renaissance shows up in the coming literary movements such as the Black Arts Movement, but I believe it shows the closest relationship to contemporary literature. If we look closely, the characteristics of freedom of creativity and thought really stand out in these two time periods. Overall, the Harlem Renaissance was a necessary period for African American literature, if not necessary for African American life. It represents the realization and hope of the power and manifestation of African Americans that came before this time that knew they could escape the horrors of slavery and amount to much more than most ever believed capable. No one believed that African Americans could create art, let alone poetry, that would inspire generations to come.